I don't think money or spending causes your long-term legacy and impact. I think doing things that light you up, that feel deeply purposeful, what I call little p purpose, which is process-oriented purpose. I think when you do those things, it's going to connect you to other people, and that's how you're going to have a deeper impact and legacy.
Welcome back to CFO Weekly, where we're talking with financial leaders about how to build efficiency in their teams, create time for strategy, and ultimately get results. This podcast is brought to you by Personiv, the trusted leader in finance and accounting outsourcing for over 30 years. See how Personiv's customized solutions can help you streamline your operations with teams that start as small as one. Visit the website at personiv.com to learn more. I'm your host, Megan Weis. Let's jump right in. Today, my guest is Jordan Grumet. Born in Evanston, Illinois in 1973, Jordan found the spark to become a doctor after a deeply personal event reshaped his life's trajectory. The unexpected loss of his father, an oncologist, ignited a passion within him to practice medicine and instilled a unique vantage point that later melded seamlessly with his financial expertise. This convergence of roles has spurred him to explore profound notions like wealth, abundance, and financial independence with a thoughtful and critical lens. Completing his studies at the University of Michigan, Jordan earned his medical degree from Northwestern University before embarking on a journey in internal medicine in Northbrook, Illinois. Presently, he serves as an associate medical director at Unity Hospice. With a profound understanding of both medicine and finance, Jordan unveiled his thoughts through blogging, specifically focusing on financial independence and wellness. This passion culminated in the launch of the Earn and Invest podcast in 2018. His dedication bore fruit in 2019 when he was honored with the Plutus Award for Best New Personal Finance Podcast, followed by consecutive nominations for Best Personal Finance Podcast of the Year in 2020 and 2021. In August 2022, Jordan's literary pursuit took shape as his book, Taking Stock: A Hospice Doctor's Advice on Financial Independence, Building Wealth and Living a Regret-Free Life, was published by Ulysses Press. His second book, The Purpose Code, will be published in January of 2025 by Harriman House Press. Jordan's journey intertwines medical insight and financial wisdom, resonating deeply with those seeking a balanced, meaningful life. In August 2022, Jordan's literary pursuit took shape as his book, Taking Stock: A Hospice Doctor's Advice on Financial Independence, Building Wealth, and Living a Regret-Free Life, was published by Ulysses Press. His second book, The Purpose Code, has been published in January of 2025 by Harriman House Press. Jordan's journey intertwines medical insight and financial wisdom, resonating deeply with those seeking a balanced, meaningful life. Jordan, thank you very much for being my guest on today's episode of CFO Weekly.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, today we're going to be talking about how purpose and legacy are linked to the way we earn, invest, and spend our time and resources. And you have a remarkable background and a really unique perspective, and I'm excited about this opportunity to learn from you and your experiences. So let's jump right in.
Let's go for it.
So first of all, and just so that we have some idea of who you are and where you've been, can you start by just giving us some insight into your background and your professional journey to date?
Certainly. So when I was 7 years old, my father died. He was a doctor. I thought I should become a doctor too. And that really fulfilled my sense of purpose and identity. And I did just that. I became a doctor, practiced for years in general internal medicine, and eventually burned out. And I was lucky enough to find the financial independence world, realized that I had a reasonable financial backing. I could leave this job, but I had no idea who I wanted to be. So instead of leaving my job, I kind of got rid of everything I didn't like in the job. What I was left with was doing hospice work. So taking care of the terminally ill was a piece of my job that I really felt filled me up. And in the meantime, that created all sorts of free time to do other things that were important to me. Personal finance was my way out of this job that was burning me out. So I started a blog, eventually a podcast, and really I focused on personal finance, financial independence, business, how we earn and invest, and more importantly, how that relates to living a good life. And so what I found actually is that the dying had a lot to say about the connection between money and life. And it could be really helpful to the rest of us who are lucky enough, hopefully, to have more time on this earth.
Her background in financial independence, where did that start and where did that come from? Where did you learn how to be financially independent?
So I was lucky because I was born to two parents who modeled great behavior. So they invested in the stock market, they owned real estate, they ran their own businesses, but they never really taught me much about it. So as an adult, I was a doctor and I was making a reasonable amount of money. So I followed their modeling. I did all the exact same things. I put money into the stock market, started buying real estate, and eventually ran my own business. But I had none of the vocabulary or understanding of what that meant. And I got to the point in medicine where I was burning out and starting to look for a way out of this profession that was no longer fulfilling me. And I happened to be lucky. I was writing a medical blog at the time, basically talking about what it felt like to be a doctor. And this guy named Jim Dolly, he runs a platform called The White Coat Investor, had just written a book and he wanted me to review it for my medical blog. And so I reviewed his book and it gave me all the vocabulary I was missing. It taught me what financial independence is, how to range our finances. And as I was doing this work, I realized that I had enough money that I could walk away from medicine, which you think would be very enjoyable to me who was feeling burnt out. But the first thing that happened actually is I panicked because I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. Being a doctor was the only purpose or identity I ever really knew.
And how do you define purpose-driven financial independence? And how can individuals align their wealth building strategies with a meaningful life beyond just having financial goals?
Well, here's the funny part. People say purpose-driven financial plan, and we say that, but a lot of times we don't think about it. So a lot of people put their finances first. And so they have these big net worth goals. They have these huge goals about what their money's going to do for them. But a lot of times they don't really know what they want. They just know they want a lot of money. So the big mistake I especially learned from the dying who were telling me about the regrets on their deathbeds is a lot of times we put the important stuff off in pursuit of careers and money and other things. So what I really try to get people to do is start thinking about purpose and identity first. In other words, what's important to us? What lights us up? Who do we want to be as people? And then we can build that financial framework around it. The mistake is to build the financial framework first for a few reasons. One is you might be like my father who died at the age of 40, so you might never get there, right? So if you're always putting purpose and identity off to make money, you may never get there. But the other problem is even if you do get there, a lot of people get there in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, but they've never really done the hard work of trying to figure out who they are or what's important to them. They forget that money is just a tool. It shouldn't really be a goal. The idea behind making money is that we should then use it to be the people we want to be and live the lives we want to live. And so we have to really be thoughtful about who do we want to be and what kind of lives we want to live now, as opposed to putting it off to some later date when we may or may not reach financial independence.
Do you have any advice for figuring out what your purpose might be? I feel like so many people struggle with that idea.
Yeah. So I always tell people we don't find our purpose, we build or create it. But it is true, you have to have these inklings, these beckonings, these things that light you up to build a life of purpose around. So when we're not really talking about finding a purpose, we're talking about finding these anchors to build purpose around. And there's some really easy ways to do that. First and foremost, since I'm a hospice doctor, I deal with the dying. We do something called the life review, where at the end of people's lives, we sit back and ask them questions like, what were their most important moments? What were their biggest failures? Who are the important people in their life? And a really important question, which I love to use to try to figure out these purpose anchors, is what do you regret? So I often tell young people, imagine that you are on your deathbed. What do you regret never having the energy, courage, or time to do? And if you can put yourself in that mind frame, you then can start thinking about what regret would look like in your life and then instead flip that around and turn it into a purpose anchor. So asking yourself about regrets is a great way to start thinking about purpose anchors. Another really good way is to start thinking about the joys of childhood. Often kids enjoy doing things, not goal-oriented things. They're not worried about what they accomplish, but they just enjoy the process of doing these things. Think about a little kid, you give them a day off of school, they may go play basketball, they may build a fort, they may play cowboys and Indians or whatever. The point is they go and they play joyfully and they're not worried about what comes of it. They lose track of time. They forget to come home for dinner. often those joys are really a version of purpose that we let go of when we get older and go to work and build careers. And so a lot of times I tell people, look at what your childhood bedroom looked like. Can you imagine what pictures were there, what medals you had won, what drawings were on your desk? All of those things could be a version of purpose for you. You can build purpose around those purpose anchors. A few other ones, a lot of people don't love their jobs. But if you subtract out all you don't love about your job, you might be left with something you really like. So I did that. I was tired of being a physician, but when I got rid of everything I didn't like, I realized the hospice work still lit me up. And so that was a great purpose anchor for me. And last but not least, if you're really looking to find, quote unquote, find purpose and you can't find it, a great way to start thinking about these anchors is to use the spaghetti method. Throw a bunch of stuff against the wall and see what sticks. That means saying yes to things you normally don't say yes to, hanging out with people you normally don't hang out with, maybe doing something that makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable for a day. And if any of that stuff lights you up, you can start building some purpose around it.
And what is it about hospice work that lights you up or that you enjoy? I have to imagine that's kind of a depressing environment.
So I find it to be the exact opposite. I think practicing medicine was depressing. I had so many patients I either couldn't help or that my solutions didn't solve their problems, or I was doing tons of paperwork, all this stuff that was no fun. The great thing about being a hospice doctor is everyone else has told them there's nothing we can do. And we get to walk in and say, there's tons of things we can do. We can get your pain controlled. We can make sure that you die in a place you want to be. We can help you come to terms with your life and do this life review. Actually, we're the ones who come in when everyone else has said that all hope is lost. And I find that incredibly gratifying. And so I see it as a very optimistic space, a space where we can really help people at this really critical juncture in their life. And so for me, it was a natural fit because my father died when I was very young and there was no one there to help us at the time, no one to connect to us. But I felt growing up, I had this deeper understanding of what it was like to lose a loved one. And so it was very natural for me to be interested and disposed towards hospice. In fact, my first week of medical school, I volunteered at the inpatient hospice at Northwestern University. I eventually abandoned that line of work as I went to practice in general internal medicine, but eventually came back to it. And so it's always been deeply pleasing to me. And it's not just that it's purposeful, but it's also meaningful. And a lot of people don't understand the difference between meaning and purpose. Meaning is our cognitive thoughts about our past. It's all about our thoughts, whereas purpose is about our present and future, and it's about actions. And so for me, doing hospice work is very meaningful because it relates to my thoughts about my father and his death. And it feels like I have a lot of agency to make change, something I didn't have when I was a kid. So that's a very meaningful thing to me. But that sense of meaning imbues me now with these actions, which are purpose. So it's very nice.
Yeah, that's an amazing outlook. And you've written a book called Taking Stock. So what inspired you to write that?
So Taking Stock was my first book. And the reason why I wrote it is when I pivoted from medicine to doing a blog and a podcast about personal finance, I would interview all of these financial independence people, all these really successful entrepreneurs, pretty much leaders in their field. And I would ask them all about wealth building and they'd have all sorts of answers. And then I'd ask them things like, well, what is enough? And why are you building all this wealth? And I would get blank stares. And so I realized that there was a part of this that was missing, the why behind we do all these things we do. And again, strangely enough, it was my hospice patients who came up with those kind of answers. They were the ones with having the lens of knowing that life was shortly going to end that could really talk about what was deeply important to them. And so I realized if I could take that message to the living, to the young, to the healthy, to the people who are interested in building businesses and making a living, if I could give them some insight about what they may regret on their deathbed, I could help them manage their finances much better because it would be much more directional. Again, this idea in taking stock is we really should put our purpose, identity, and connections first and then build a financial framework around them. And the dying really taught me that.
What role do you believe that financial independence plays in giving people the freedom to live with purpose and avoid regrets?
So here's the thing, and this is what people always get wrong. Money is a tool, and that's it. And it's one of many tools. It's a wonderful tool, a very potent tool, right? Because if we want to live a life of purpose, one of the things we can do is use that money to not do things that we loathe, right? So if I don't like cleaning my house and I make enough money, I could take some of that money and pay someone else to clean my house. That frees up some time and space to do purposeful activities. Or if I want to be a writer and being a writer is really purposeful for me, I can take some of that tool of money and hire a coach that teaches me how to be a better writer. These are both great uses of money, but the mistake everyone makes is they think that it is the only tool. And so what I try to convince people, it's a powerful tool, but you have all these other tools at your disposal. So for instance, you have your youth, your energy, your communities, your connections, your knowledge, your passions. Those are also tools. So I talk to young people all the time and I get them coming to me and maybe they're 22 years old and just got out of college and they have a job they don't like and they're working 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 Monday through Friday. And they say, look, I don't have enough money to worry about purpose right now. I'm just trying to put food on the table. And a lot of times I'll look at them and say, that's true. You don't have a lot of money like I do because I'm 51 years old. But what you do have is you have much more youth and energy, things that I don't have, tools that I don't have. And so maybe on the weekend, since you don't have kids and you don't have a mortgage and you're not otherwise indisposed, you can take some of your free time and energy and start doing something that's purposeful to you. Maybe even something that eventually makes some money. So if you start a side hustle and you do it 3 hours on a Sunday for the next 6 months, one of two things are going to happen. Either you're not going to make any money at it, but if you liked doing what you're doing, you've already won the game because you've added in 3 hours of purposeful activities into your week. On the other hand, if you make a little bit of money, maybe that gives you some margin and you can subtract out some of the things you loathe about work. Maybe you don't like working 5 days a week, but now you make some side hustle income. You can start working 4 days a week. Maybe you can build that business that you always wanted to build and eventually it takes over your 9 to 5. And now you're doing something you're super passionate and excited about, and it's also paying the bills. And so I think all of these things are ways in which we can start pursuing purpose, even if we don't feel like we have enough money.
Do you think the fear holds people back from from doing something like that, giving something a try?
For sure. I mean, here are the excuses I always get. The common excuses I get are money or time. And so we talked about money already. And so let's talk about time. The Bureau of Labor Statistics does the American Time Survey every few years. And basically it shows that most Americans have 5 to 6 hours of free time a day. So it's not time. So if it's not money and it's not time, what's holding people back? Certainly failure. A lot of us are incredibly afraid of failing at doing this thing that's ultimately really important to us. And I think also this idea of putting aside your worries about career and money and starting to think about what's deeply important to you makes us realize that life is finite. And to work on these things means that I may die at some point and not get there. And that scares the heck out of us. So it's much easier to just put them aside and concentrate on the easy stuff like money and career. It's almost like a mirage that protects us from doing the harder work because the harder work is emotional and time consuming.
Do you think this is an American problem? Are we just brainwashed in this country to think that get rich and that's all that matters?
Well, I think the American dream script definitely teaches us this idea that money is central and big audacious goals are central, right? In America, we say, if you can dream it, you can build it. And so really, society pushes us to make these really big, unreachable goals. And social media and marketing also do it because they want us to buy something. So they create all these beautiful images of things like six-pack abs and traveling the world and running a 7-figure business. But the truth of the matter is, not everyone has the agency to do those things. We're not the right people at the right time saying the right things with the right genetics and a lot of luck. And so this sets us up for frustration. And so, yes, I think American society, more than some other societies, pushes us for these large goals that probably serve a lot of other people's needs, like the influencers and the marketers and the businesses, but probably don't serve our individual needs.
And what are the key questions people should ask themselves when they're evaluating their financial choices, particularly when it comes to balancing short-term desires, which you just mentioned, versus long-term impact on their legacy?
So here's the thing. I don't think money or spending causes your long-term legacy and impact. I think doing things that light you up, that feel deeply purposeful, what I call little p purpose, which is process-oriented purpose. I think when you do those things, it's going to connect you to other people, and that's how you're going to have a deeper impact and legacy. And so, first things first, I think we have to disconnect spending money or making money from impact and legacy. I just don't think they're related, or not nearly as we hope so. So, it is true if you become a billionaire and you give lots of money to philanthropy, that's going to be part of your impact and legacy. But again, that's not really in the purview of most people. And so, if that's your goal, you're going to feel really frustrated if you don't make it there. I think the bigger question is, how do we spend today versus save for tomorrow, whether that's for our retirement or whether that's to put the money towards philanthropy or other things that are important to us. And the problem is, if we really want to answer that question, we kind of need to know when we're going to die, right? So that we can spend accordingly and have just enough to make it to the end. But of course, no one knows that. And so what I always tell people is you should ask yourself one basic question. What scares you most? Are you most afraid that you're going to die young and wealthy and not get to enjoy or use that wealth for what you want to use it for? Or are you going to live old and die broke because you ran out of money? If you can figure out what scares you more of those two questions, I think it's a great way of thinking about YOLO versus deferred gratification. YOLO, you only live once. Let's go ahead and spend it now on something that's important to us, versus deferred gratification is holding it and saving it for later. Those people who are worried about dying wealthy and young should really probably spend more. And even if they do live to an older age, they're going to be really enjoying themselves because they're spending on things that are important for them, including things they think will give them an impact and legacy. Whereas those who are really afraid of not having enough money later in life should probably be a little more conservative and save more. I think this is the best way to start thinking about these things so you can balance two very difficult things, which is spending today versus saving for tomorrow.
And talk to me about Wealth with Purpose Mastermind. What is that?
So I run a mastermind based on the Earn and Invest podcast, which is my podcast. And basically, the mastermind is people who feel like they've kind of figured out money. Does it mean they're financially independent? No, but they know the steps. They understand investing. They understand what they need to do professionally. But unfortunately, that's left a hole or a gap in the sense now that their money is solved, they realize that they don't know what to fill up all that time, energy, and worry about. They've lived most of their life thinking that the attainment of money was what was going to light them up or make them happy or solve their problems. And then they realize they don't. The idea behind the mastermind is to bring together people in a very similar space where they can talk about their goals, their dreams, and how to move forward, how to create momentum, and how to start building a life where money is just a tool, but then you can use that tool to start doing things that are deeply important for you. Most people don't know what is deeply important for them. As we discussed earlier, they need to do some of that work on their purpose anchors, and then they need to have the courage to move forward and start using that money to live the life they want to live.
In hospice care, what is it? What if the top one or two regrets that you hear over and over again from people at the end of their lives?
So interestingly enough, everyone is different and we deeply regret different types of things. So it's always the same theme. I really regret that I never had the energy, courage, or time to, but then it's a kind of fill in the blank because everyone is so different. Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example. I've done this exercise myself, trying to do a life review right now while I'm alive and don't have a terminal diagnosis because I want to not have regrets. And my answer to that 10 years ago was I would really regret if I didn't traditionally publish a book. And so I knew that was a purpose anchor for me and I needed to work on that. But the dying have all sorts of regrets. Sometimes that they didn't go and try to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Other times it's they didn't write a book. Sometimes it's they didn't fix that relationship with that important person in their life that they used to be connected to but are not anymore. For every person, there's something slightly different because we all have different purpose anchors in our lives and we pursue them in different ways. What I find people don't regret is they don't regret the things that were deeply important to them that they tried and failed at. So they don't regret if they never made it completely up the mountain. What they regret is that they didn't have the courage to try. And so the answers are varied, and it really depends on what's important to you as a person, what you could possibly regret if you don't pursue it.
Have you ever encountered someone who had no regrets?
I certainly have found a number of people who mostly gave it their best when it came to those important things in their lives. So there's plenty of people who actually do the work, who do have a real sense of purpose, and who go after those things. And people tend to die like they lived. So I get people all the time who say, how do I have a good death? And I always say, well, people tend to die like they live. So if you want to have a good death, you have to have a good life. And if you want to have a good life, you have to start addressing these deeply important things sooner. And so there are definitely people who do. It's not necessarily the majority, but there are plenty of them who start thinking about purpose and start living out that purpose at a much younger age. And so when they get to the point that they have a terminal diagnosis, they realize they already kind of left it all on the table and they're totally okay with it.
Have any advice for overcoming fear? I mean, I know it holds me back. Do you have any advice having all this experience? How can a person overcome what's holding them back, their fears?
Well, a lot of times when it comes to fear, again, we're talking about meaning and not purpose. So let me repeat this. Meaning is about our past and it's about our thoughts, where purpose is about our present and future and it's about actions. And so fears are a lot about meaning. So the question is, what are the stories you tell yourself about yourself that associate fear with trying these new things? And a lot of times when people really do this deeper work, it's called narrative therapy, where you go back and think about your traumatic events of childhood and the things that you really struggled with. You realize that fear comes from a lack of a sense of enoughness. And so you set this up in your mind that if I fail, then I'm not enough as a person, but if I succeed, I am. But it's just so scary to face this sense of not enoughness that I'm not even going to try. So the answer is not to go and try. The answer is to go back and figure out why you're so afraid of not being enough. And a lot of times that has to do with our past. It has to do with our traumas. I was a victim of this, right? So my father died. I was 7 years old, and I thought I could cosmically fix the world by being a doctor like him. Why? Because at 7 years old, I saw the world through a very selfish lens. I figured at 7, anything that happened in the world probably had to do with me. And so my dad must have died because I wasn't good enough. And that propelled me for the next 2 decades to work my butt off and become a doctor. And at one point, I finally was practicing and I was a doctor. And guess what? I still didn't feel enough. I still didn't cosmically fix the fact that my father died. I had to go back and rewrite that narrative and tell myself a different story. It wasn't that I was bad or that I wasn't enough. My father died because he died. And I was just a good kid put in a rotten situation. But look how heroically I got through it and lived a successful life and got married and had kids and had a really stable job. When I changed that narrative and told myself that instead I was a hero and not a victim, and that I always was enough, my father dying had nothing to do with my sense of enoughness. All of a sudden, walking into the present and future and thinking about purpose and doing things like public speaking and podcasting just wasn't so scary anymore because I didn't have to prove that I was enough. I already realized that I was enough. All I had to do is find these things that light me up and do them. And if I succeeded, great. And if I didn't succeed, if I enjoyed the process of doing it, it didn't really matter what the end goal came out to be.
And back to your book, Taking Stock, but within that book, you mentioned time hacking techniques. So how do you encourage people to rethink how they spend their time? And what are some of these hacks that we can implement?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are lots of different ways to maximize your time. And so, geez, you're asking me about Take Stock, which I haven't thought about in years because it's my old book, whereas I'm thinking about The Purpose Code, which is my new book. So you have to give me a moment to reset and think about this book because I have not thought about it for years. So there are a number of time hacking techniques. One is to do things early in the morning, right? So a lot of times we get distracted during the day. And so things that normally wouldn't take us as long take us much longer because our phone's going off and people are trying to get our attention. So first and foremost, doing things early in the day before everyone's awake is a really good way to get some of your time back. I also talk about something called time bursting, right? This idea that we can work intensely, but only for short periods of time. And so instead of trying to do a 9 to 5 and work intensely for all of those 8 hours, what I suggest is put an hour or two aside, turn off all your social media, turn off your phone, and work intensely for that hour or two, and then take frequent breaks where you're resting and doing other things. This can just mean that the time you are using is much more intense, but also much more productive. So I think those are two really good ways. Another way is to realize that perfect is the enemy of good. So a lot of times we spend most of our time trying to accomplish the last 20% of a task, but the first 80% of the task, often we do a really good job at it and we do it very quickly. So the question, is it really necessary to get that last 20% right? A lot of times it isn't. Usually 80% is good enough. And so a lot of times, if we just stick with the first 80%, we can be finished with a task in an hour or two that might take us 5 or 10 hours if we really want to get to 100% completeness. So that's another way we can kind of dismantle our wasting of time, is to realize that perfect is the enemy of good and be happy with good enough, which sometimes doesn't mean that it's your 100% product.
Well, that's great advice. So talk to me about your new book.
So what happened after I wrote Taking Stock, it was based on this main premise that we should put purpose and identity and connections before our financial framework. And I went to market this book. I went to conferences. I gave a bunch of talks, and I would get people after these talks angry with me. They would come up, they would be fuming. The first time I saw this, I was like, okay, this is just a one-off, no big deal. But it happened over and over again. And they would all say the same thing. They'd say, you're telling me to find my purpose. I've been looking for my purpose forever. I have no idea what purpose is. I don't think there is a purpose. Please stop saying I should find my purpose. Now, of course, this made me go down the rabbit hole of research. And when I researched purpose in life, what the researchers call it, I found that the studies overwhelmingly show that people with a sense of purpose in life are happier, live longer, and are healthier. On the other hand, I found other studies that show that up to 91% of people at some point in their life have what's called purpose anxiety. This idea that purpose actually makes them frustrated and depressed. So this was a paradox. How can purpose be both the most important thing and also incredibly anxiety-ridden? I realized that we probably get purpose wrong. We think of it as one thing and it's probably two things. And one of those things is probably more associated with anxiety and the other is probably more associated with the health, happiness, and longevity. So I wrote the Purpose Code to help people choose that right version of purpose so they could easily build a life of purpose that would lead to some of those benefits we were talking about.
And is this book published? And if so, where is it available?
So Purpose Code comes out today, January 7th, and it is available everywhere books are sold. If you are interested, you can go to jordangrumet.com. That's JORDANGRUMET.com. And there you will find links to buy both Taking Stock as well as the Purpose Code, as well as see all the places that I create content, including the Earn and Invest podcast and the Purpose Code Substack.
And as we wrap up our conversation today, what is your advice for how we can use our resources, whether that be time, money, or talent, to ensure that we live a life that contributes positively to others and leaves a meaningful legacy?
Well, here's the thing. I think everyone gets it wrong because they go out and they say, how am I going to live a positive life, leave a meaningful legacy, have impact? And I think that's the most certain way to get it wrong. Instead, I tell you, what does purpose look like in your life? What is what I call little p purpose, process-oriented purpose? What lights you up? Go and pursue those things that light you up. And a happy side effect is you will create communities around you based on it because it lights you up, and you will have a greater impact and legacy long-term by doing things that are deeply important to you.
Jordan, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I really enjoyed speaking with you, and thank you so much for finding the time to be here with us today to share your experience and knowledge, and I wish you all the best. It sounds like you're doing amazing things.
Thank you so much.
To our listeners, please tune in next week, and until then, take care. Thank you for listening to this episode of CFO Weekly. We hope you picked up some useful insights and strategies to help move your business forward. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And if you found it valuable, we'd love for you to leave a review and share it with your network. It helps us bring even more great content to finance leaders like you. For more episodes, resources, and to see how Personav can support your accounting and finance needs, visit Personav.com. See you next week.